everyone, my name is Tori Schafer and I will be talking to you about my experience representing LGBT plus characters in games. So first of all, let's talk about who I am. I am a writer and narrative designer. I currently work for Spellbreak, a PvP fantasy game, which is currently in beta. In the past, I worked for Elder Scrolls Online, an MMORPG set in the Elder Scrolls universe, and a game called Backbone, which was an indie noir detective narrative set in a dystopian future. I also wrote for the quest Manor of Masques for Elder Scrolls Online, which included a character named Alchemy, who was Elder Scrolls' first openly transgender woman, and that quest ended up winning a GLAAD award for Outstanding Video Game in 2019. GLAAD is the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and works to help endorse respectful representation of the LGBT plus community in media. And this is my content information. You can see my website, my Twitter, and my email. Feel free to contact me if you have any further questions or comments about this presentation. So, how can we ensure respectful LGBT plus representation in games? So we're going to talk about what is LGBT plus representation, what does good representation look like. I'll use examples of my own work to show how I respectfully represented the LGBT plus community, and I'll give you some tips and tricks to help you create LGBT plus representation in your own games. So first of all, what is LGBT plus representation? So it's characters and medias who have a minority sexuality and or gender. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, but also asexual, demisexual, non-binary characters. Any character who is not straight and or cisgendered. It has a very troubled history, obviously. I think that's something that's well known. There's been a lack of representation in media. There's been stereotypes, harmful tropes, and because of this kind of lack of representation and negative representation, the LGBT plus community can be very sensitive to how they are represented, which is why we need to work as game developers and anybody who creates media to make sure that their representation that we are putting out there is respectful to the community, more so than, you know, people who are not LGBT plus, characters who are not LGBT plus. And we need to ensure that we are understanding and cognizant of those issues and of that history when we are creating these characters. So, what does respectful LGBT plus representation look like? I'm going to be giving you some pillars of good representation that would also apply to other marginalized groups, if that's something that you're interested in as well. Just click this. So, realistic. Is this portrayal accurate? It's a portrayal that avoids stereotypes and makes sure that the character isn't defined by their sexuality or gender. And this is helped by research, making sure that game developers who are working on this content are as diverse as possible, and also consuming community-approved LGBT plus media, things that have had a positive response from the LGBT plus community. And making sure that you understand kind of the types of identities that you're representing. Is this considerate? Is the narrative considerate of past and current LGBT plus issues? Making sure that characters are not inherently bad because of their sexuality or gender. The narrative should not punish a character because of their identity, even if the society that character is a part of does. Very different things. How you represent that person, how you present them in the game, can really define if something is considered or not. And obviously, once again, mindful of the LGBT plus community and the past representation, making sure that your narrative is sympathetic to these characters. So question, how is the narrative treating this character? What's the message the narrative is giving to the player about this character and their identity? Being mindful of all that. Explicit. Are characters explicitly stated to be LGBT plus? Do they openly say their identity, or openly talk about their identity's experiences? But you have to be mindful of doing this without the character's consent. Having other characters reveal a character's identity can be, it's just something that you want to avoid both in games and real life, making sure that you had the consent of that individual, that their identity can be openly talked about or shown. And just the best way to do that is to make sure the character is the one telling the player who they are and what their identity is. Respectful. Is the character's identity respected by the narrative? Making sure that LGBT plus identity is never the butt of a joke. You can have these characters be funny. You can have these characters make jokes, but not in a stereotypical, harmful way. You have to be respectful of the LGBT plus community and kind of their experiences, and making sure that you're not relying on, those harmful things. And being respectful to the community as well on social media, making sure that on social media, your studio, your developers are not making harmful, jokes or comments about the LGBT plus community, and just being mindful of how that community, the LGBT plus community, reacts to your characters, interprets your characters in your stories. If somebody has a headcanon that a character identifies a certain way, or two characters have a certain kind of relationship, making sure that you respect that, because that is how that player is deciding to consume your content so that they are represented, and making sure that you never feel like they're wrong for doing so, or that they're lesser for doing so, I suppose. So just being cognizant of your community and how they consume media and how you treat them on social media and events and things like that. So I'll be talking about, my first example is Elder Scrolls Online. I'll be talking about two examples here. So my first example is a quest in the Elder Scrolls Online Somerset expansion or chapter, which is an MMORPG set in the Elder Scrolls universe, a high fantasy setting that explores various themes. From the very get-go in Elder Scrolls Online, it was decided that LGBT plus characters were a part of that universe, and they were just accepted by their society, as to not alienate LGBT plus players who may be playing Elder Scrolls Online, and also just because we wanted representation to be, able to put in the game very easily, I think, and a lot of characters to identify as that without worrying about societal repercussions. So there's a variety of LGBT plus characters in Elder Scrolls Online, but mostly it's gay representation, lesbian, bisexual characters, things of that nature, which is why I was really excited when I got the opportunity to work on the quest involving the character Alchemy, who is the first openly transgender woman in Elder Scrolls. She is respected by her society. She's respected by the narrative, as I'll get into in a little bit. And she's in the quest Manor of Masques for Elder Scrolls Online Somerset, as I've said. She does have some predecessors who are non-binary. The God Vivek, the Daedric Princess. But we wanted to make sure that her character reflected a transgender woman's experience, and that was how she openly identified as. So, the Manor of Masques quest, this is just a short description, but Renaid, who is shown on screen right here, Renaid has asked me to find her brother Laredale and stop him from joining the House of Reveries. I must audition as well in order to figure out who he is. So this is a high elf. She's a high elf who is looking for her brother, and she says, oh no, my brother's trying to join an acting troupe and I want him to be a mage like I am. You have to figure out who he is, because everybody in this acting troupe wears masks on their face. So she says, you should audition as well, see who my brother is, find out who my brother is, so I can talk him out of this nonsense. And surprise, surprise, Laredale now identifies as Alchemy and is a woman. And that's how you kind of learn through the quest narrative that Alchemy is transgender, because you're introduced to this character as Renaid's brother Laredale, and then you learn about this character Alchemy, and eventually it's revealed that she used to identify as Laredale, and she used to identify as a man, and she now identifies as Alchemy and a woman. So just kind of going through this quest and kind of seeing if it's respectful. Is this realistic? Is this a realistic representation of a transgender woman? So first, we made sure that Alchemy was a fully fleshed out character with her own hopes and dreams. she does feel that she must keep her identity a secret from her sister, but hopes for her sister's acceptance. Now, this is because she's an actress when her sister wants her to be a mage. But yes, it is supposed to reflect the fact that she is a transgender woman and that she wants her sister's acceptance as that identity as well. She felt uncomfortable in her old identity and now feels happier with her new one in more ways than just her gender. You know, she was also very unhappy as a mage and a scholar, but we wanted that to reflect her kind of change over to her new identity as a woman, as Alchemy. And she's connected to and supported by other transgender characters off screen. She talks about those experiences and how those people have helped her kind of, embrace and really love her new identity, but we never show those characters in the quest just because of time constraints and character constraints and things like that. Is this considerate? So we made sure that Alchemy was an ally to the hero and accepted by her sister. We wanted to keep it very positive for this kind of first foray, this first time representing a transgender woman in Elder Scrolls, online in Elder Scrolls period. We make sure that the player never reveals Alchemy's identity without her explicit consent. The player does advise Alchemy if she wants to talk to her sister or not, but the player never says her identity or tells other people about her identity. It's all Alchemy doing that. And Somerset, her society, her homeland of the High Elves, Somerset, accepts her identity and doesn't really care that she's transgender, which is, again, going with that overall theme of LGBT plus characters being accepted by the society or their societies in Elder Scrolls. Is this explicit? Alchemy openly admits that she is transgender. She talks about her past identity and her current identity. She discusses other transgender high elves in Somerset that she's met, and she talks about their experiences as well in dialogue after the quest. And she speculates that there are many such individuals all over Tamriel. This was something we wanted to write into the quest because we wanted to make sure that players who are transgender, whatever race they decide to play, if they were an orc or a Nord or a dark elf, that, yeah, you exist too in the world. It's just not high elves, it's everybody. Every race has kind of this, these individuals. And she talks about that, and we just wanted to make sure that players felt comfortable role-playing as their own characters, as a transgender identity. So, is this respectful? Alchemy's identity is never spoken in a joking or harmful or mean-spirited way. She's referred to as a woman, as she is. The player never is able to even make harmful comments because we didn't want to, upset LGBT plus players who may be playing as that character for that option to even exist. Just make sure it's very respectful all the way through. She's featured a number of marketing materials for Somerset, but she was also included in our International Women's Day post last year, which a lot of players were really, really happy about, that we included her in this community picture. Just this small little token meant so much to so many people. Again, making sure that social media is also respectful and representing LGBT plus community is very important in games as well. Now, nothing's perfect. We did have representation concerns. I think you're always going to have concerns about the content you produce in the media and the representation you produce, in any media. Stereotypes. Yeah, it's a stereotype that LGBT plus people are actors. That's truth. It's not, I don't think it's a particularly harmful stereotype, but it is something that a lot of media does or talks about and things like that. And that was just something that we decided that she fit in well. We created the acting troupe and the lore of the acting troupe before we introduced Alchemy. So this was just something that we felt she fit into well. But we had to be cognizant that this was a stereotype. Her appearance, Alchemy wears a mask. Everybody in the Manor of Masques, everybody in the House of Reveries, which is her acting troupe, wears a mask. They talk about it all the time. They talk about why they do that. But, we have a trans character who is wearing a mask and is never really shown her face. Again, this was part of the lore before we introduced Alchemy, but we were cognizant that may have been something that was, something that we wouldn't have wanted to do, but it did fit into the lore in the game. You know, and that's just something that we had to kind of be cognizant of. But unfortunately, you know, we did have a character whose face was covered. The resolution, the ending resolution, is very quickly handled. We wanted to show that Renaid accepted alchemy and loved her still, and just have a very positive experience. But yeah, it happens very quickly because that's kind of, the quest is only so long and the narrative is only so long. So we wanted to make sure that the resolution kind of came together in a very positive way. We're aware, you know, of these issues, but, you know, sometimes the gameplay just kind of, you can't have perfect representation the way that you really want it to be. And she's the one and only. At the point of this quest, Alchemy was the only transgender woman in the game, which creates much higher stakes. It's less realistic portrayals of the many facets of transgender people. The more representation you have, the more rounded your representation is, because you can show different sides of that identity, different facets of it. But yeah, definitely, you know, wanting to include Alchemy in this content and then build on her representation, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So as you can see, fan reaction was super positive, super great. I was really happy with how the community accepted this quest and just loved this quest. You can see these comments that I'm including here. Just like super excited. I've had fans come up to me and be like, oh, at the end of the quest when they hug, I cried because it meant so much to me. So just, you know, it's a quest that means a lot to me, a character that means a lot to me because of how much it means to other people, which is what representation is really all about. Representing the LGBT plus community is for the LGBT plus community first and foremost, that they feel respectfully represented, and they're going to be excited and happy to be represented. Here's some fan art. Just wanted to include this. I really like these pieces and how they came out of Alchemy. And then we won a GLAAD award in 2019, which I was I'm super honored that we were able to win this. And they just kind of really caught on that the story reflects the reality of transgender people today, even though it doesn't explicitly talk about, like, you know, Renaid doesn't, you know, Renaid accepts her sister for who she is, you know, accepts Alchemy, but, you know, we use that kind of narrative about being a mage and a scholar to kind of show that without explicitly showing that, I suppose you could say. So, yeah. And then building on representation, Murkmire was the DLC came right after this. It's about Argonians, the lizard people in Elder Scrolls, and their lore just has that they can change gender, that they are able to do that with the help of their tree gods. And in that society, Argonians are really all about change and accepting change. So I was able to create, I concepted and wrote for a quest, a small quest where there was a transgender man and a transgender woman character. And then I also wrote a book called A Grand Transformation, just talking about how society celebrates this and celebrates when Argonians, when one of their members of their tribe changes their gender. So the next example I'm going to talk about is a character in Backbone. Now, Backbone is a noir narrative game about a raccoon detective living in dystopian Vancouver. It has very heavy themes of racism, misogyny, and, yes, homophobia. It's a society that is heavily homophobic, and most of the LGBT plus community is heavily closeted for their own protection. And those who aren't are rejected. You know, they might be sent to jail, rehabilitation camps. It's heavily influenced by homophobia in America and Russia. And, you know, this created a new challenge for me. How do I create respectful representation in a very disrespectful game world with a very disrespectful and homophobic society? So, you know, thinking about that, I concepted and created the character Sophia. So Sophia, who is not pictured here, these are two main characters, but when I concepted this character and created her, she did not have any art associated with her, so I'll just be talking about her today and kind of how I created her character and how I concepted her to be a respectful representation, even though she herself is disrespected by her society. So Sophia is a lesbian NPC who has been rejected by her society and her family and forced into homelessness. So just thinking about, you know, my 4 pillars, is this realistic? Unfortunately, yes. Sophia has a developed personality and opinions. We made sure that she was a fully fleshed out character, but her lack of status as a homeless individual allows her to speak openly about her sexuality to the player character. And unfortunately, homelessness is just a common issue within LGBT plus community, especially youth, especially teenagers or young adults, because of being rejected by their families. And Sophia does reflect this. So yeah, trying to make her as realistic and fleshed out as possible. Is this considerate? I made sure that Sophia was a sympathetic character and a victim of her society, not of the narrative that her society was the one who rejected her and didn't accept her. And I wanted to allow a member of the LGBT plus community to speak about society's discrimination against them. I didn't want to make sure that, I didn't want her mother to talk about her experiences or her friend or somebody else, but for Sophia to be able to talk about her experiences herself, to give a voice to that community. Is this explicit? Sophia does openly state that she was in a relationship with another woman, and she shares that story with a brutal honesty to the player character, wanting to make sure that the player understood what her identity was and how society did not accept that. And is this respectful? The player character does not make any assumptions about Sophia or judge her. Maybe the person playing the game does, but we did not want the player character to do so. The player character just asks questions, allows Sophia to give her own thoughts and her own opinion. And we also researched and tried to avoid lesbian tropes in media, such as like a lipstick lesbian, dead lesbian syndrome. These are common tropes. Trying to avoid those to make her not a stereotypical character, or a stereotyped character, I should say. Of course, we had concerns, She has a tragic backstory. Her backstory in her current life, very dispiriting. But this is a result of her society. Not so much that the narrative, is punishing her for her identity, but that her society has punished her for her identity. She's a mouthpiece. She acts as a voice for her entire community. And as we know, different perspectives lead to more rounded narratives. This was just unfortunately because of limited characters, limited time. It's a short game. And, this was kind of a character that I was able to concept out, who was able to talk about her experiences because of her position in society. If she was just walking down the street, or if she was, in a crowded bar, she wouldn't talk about these experiences, but because of, where she was at the time and what her status was, she was able to tell the player character, like, yeah, this is what happened to me, and this is who I am. And she's the only openly NPC we meet. Again, short narrative, closeted society. We wanted to make sure that we had this representation, but it's always nice to have more representation and a more rounded LGBT plus, representation to show your audience and your players and to talk about and to have in your story. So just two very different experiences for me, and experiences to write about and to research and to give, but always making sure that no matter how the game world sees the character, that I as a creator and the narrative that I help create is respectful to those characters. And that's all about those 4 pillars, being respectful, being considerate, being realistic, being explicit. You can do those things and make sure that those are elements that your narrative has, no matter how your story kind of sees this character, or your society of that world sees the character. So just some tips. How can we ensure that our games have respectful LGBT plus representation? Research. Making sure that you understand these identities, you understand their history, you understand kind of where these characters are coming from. Hiring for diversity, and making sure that your studio welcomes that diversity. If you have LGBT plus people in your studio or in your creative team, they are able to give a much more, like a better insight into that community and to that representation. Studio initiatives to create that diverse representation, being, leads need to be the ones to say, hey guys, let's make sure that we're creating a diverse cast, a diverse story, and supporting designers who want to create that representation, giving them the time to research, giving them the resources needed, making sure that you're positive about that initiative of creating those characters can go a long way. As I said, your social media presence needs to be LGBT plus positive as well, making sure that you are not saying anything rude or degrading, and keeping that LGBT plus positive representation going throughout all of your studio initiatives, marketing, things like that. And consulting the experts. I talked, about diversity readers, and there are a lot of individuals who you can hire on as a diversity reader to play your game and to play through the narrative, to give you, notes about the representation that you are presenting. Another group you can talk to is GLAAD. They are a media group. They are there for consultation and to, give you advice about your game. Gamer X is a group that talks about a lot of gamer perspectives, but they are another resource that you can reach out to. This website, Queerly Represent Me, has great examples of video game representation, a lot of information that you can read through. Just another resource that I found very helpful in my own research. Yeah, so just the takeaways I want to kind of say here is that LGBT plus characters and narratives deserve a place in games. They deserve to be represented. And representation does not need to be perfect to be respectful. You're going to have hitches within your gameplay, within your narratives, and you're just going to have to try to use as much of those pillars as you can to ensure that even though there might be, some issues, that overall you are giving a respectful, story for this character to be a part of, a respectful role. And fans will respond positively to respectful representation. I know it can be scary because when you get it wrong, the LGBT plus community is very upset, but you gotta, know that when you really try to put yourself out there and create that diverse representation, you will get a lot of, excitement and tears, honestly. And it's just very important for the community to be represented and to be shown in media, and video games is included in that. Great. So let's work together to ensure that every game has respectful LGBT plus representation. Like I said, you can contact me if you have any more questions or comments. I have my website up here, my Twitter, my email. Feel free to reach out. I'll answer as best I can. And thank you so much for sitting through this presentation and, hearing what I had to say. I hope you have a good evening, afternoon. Thank you.